thank you very much to Jan and Anna for inviting me today and putting the needs of the special needs child squarely at the centre, if that's possible, of the Montessori community here in New Zealand. I'm going to be showing you a presentation today. Hopefully Carl can go, yeah. And if you are a visual learner, you'll find plenty of words on the screen. If you're an auditory learner, you can close your eyes now and listen, and we'll know that you're listening. And if you're a multitasker, you can read and listen at the same time. Have faith in the child. It's not enough to be well-intentioned and perceptive. Love is dynamic. If we love someone, we want to do something for him. If we love the child, we must realize that he's been neglected and forgotten in a world very rich in varied and beautiful things that are superfluous. We must therefore follow a new and wider path. This will not only make the child happier, but will be a source of unimagined wealth and glory for our own lives. This first appeared in the Montessori magazine in 1950, and AMI reprinted it in Communications in 1965. So are there really more children with special needs these days? In the UK and elsewhere in the developing world, there is a seeming explosion of incidences of children with special needs. Many of these emerging needs can be linked directly to changes in modern lifestyles and the environment, and at MIFA we call these environmental insults. Parents, educators, clinicians and policymakers are stretched to find and provide adequate resources to meet these emerging needs. In the UK, over 1 million children and young people, that's 2 or 3 in every UK classroom, have some form of long-term and persistent speech, language and communication difficulty. This can affect them early, severely, and for life. 50 to 90% of children with persistent speech, language and communication difficulties go on to have breathing difficulties. In areas of poverty, and I know this is an area of great concern to Connie, over 50% of children are starting schools with delayed communication skills. Their speech may be unclear, vocabulary is smaller, sentences are shorter, and they're able to understand only very simple instructions. The good news is that many of these children can catch up if they get the right support in their early years. So what's changed? Historically, children with mental disabilities stayed at home or were educated in special needs institutions. With the advent of inclusion, many children with mental disability now attend regular schools and are cared for within the community. However, in the UK, on average, teacher training includes 1.5 days on special needs and none on mental disability, yet teachers are expected to differentiate lesson planning to suit the needs of all children. In the UK, the advent of the national curriculum for mainstream schools resulted in a one-size-meets-all education, so teachers have less autonomy and less flexibility to adapt lesson planning and teaching styles to suit the interests and the needs of the children, including the inclusive children in their care. So inclusion plus the national curriculum equals. McVicker Hunt in The Challenge of Incompetence and Poverty says, presented with circumstances which demand too much from them, children with special needs either withdraw into themselves or explode in anger. Kirk and Johnson noted, feelings of security, belongingness, and accomplishment, all the feelings that we're nurturing, as Jamie's just been talking about us, were thwarted. If we love the child, we must follow a new and wider path. 2011, let's bring it right up to date. And Clark Aldridge in Unschooling Rules says, children should be raised by people who love them, not used to meet contrived short-term goals. And he suggests, investigate the world of Montessori, where learning to be and learning to do and a deep respect for children are thoroughly woven into the curriculum. These children are classed as special needs because they do not have the capacity or the capability to conform with the requirements of the modern classroom. They have special needs because they're not able to access their education at school, because the environment is not adapted to suit their interests and needs. What these children desperately need is a prepared, enriched environment and observant and loving teachers who understand the natural laws of child development and know how to prepare for their next steps in learning. What else has changed? Premature births, more special needs. More premature babies survive, and premature babies are likely to have developmental needs as they grow up. This exacts a heavy load on families and health and education systems. These days, 90% of preterm, that's before 37 weeks, preterm babies survive. And did you know that 80% of those babies have special needs? Premature births, more special needs. This is the 2010 World Health Organization of the countries with the highest premature births. Look who's there at number 6. It's the United States of America. In the States now, for the first time, we have more non-Indigenous babies being born than Indigenous babies. These are the children who are often living in poverty. These are the children who are being born with the potential for learning disabilities. These are the children of parents who have special needs themselves. English is not their first language. This is the community. This is our modern community, and this is the community that Montessori has to address today. So what else has changed? Originally I thought this was an hour, so I had to cut this keynote down to 0.5. But the good news is that Anna has popped everything already up online, and you can see the full lecture there, where you can use this for your CPD, your personal development, to discuss. There are fewer extended families, less talking, 2 parents working, less talking, less reading time, parents with children, forward-facing pushchairs, less talking, car seats and bouncers, walking chairs, playpens and strollers. These babies are getting less tummy time, and we know the importance of pushing up and moving your head from side to side for vestibular stimulation, and more about this in the workshops. Poor nutrition, rush nutrition, no breakfast, late nights, too little sleep, more mobility. And yet we've heard from the other speakers already, children need routine and order. And we're not even going to start on environmental and dietary pollutants. So let's look at the modern family. Are modern families less competent? Many children in the UK are starting school unable to use the toilet and the wash basin independently, to dress themselves, communicate their needs and interests, engage in activities with curiosity. We're going to look at the challenge of incompetence and poverty because they're interrelated. As a characteristic of individual persons, incompetence results in poverty. And the poverty of one generation becomes, by virtue of the circumstances which hamper the development of abilities and motives, a basis for the incompetence of the next generation. So we need to challenge and change our understanding for the basis of competence. Families who are inherently incompetent, i.e., they haven't had the life opportunities which enable them to take their place in society, in gainful employment, and contribute to that society, do an inadequate job of teaching their children the abilities and the motives needed to cope with schooling, even though they love their children as much as any other parents do. Compensatory education at school is insufficient and too late to make up for what children have missed in their first 4 or 5 years. Deliberate efforts are needed to help parents learn how to arrange circumstances for their children to better focus on and foster from birth sensory motor development, attitudes, motives, and values which must be acquired if the child is to be able to cope with school and later participate in the mainstream of our increasingly technological culture. So what is poverty? Until recently, global poverty indicators have focused exclusively on money. In 2012, the UK government commissioned several reports into social care, early years education, and poverty. The irony is that now that money is tight, social provision is being considered from an economic point of view. The Frank Field Review has, in order to reach its social and economic goals, all babies, children, and young people should have the social and emotional bedrock essential for their future development and their ability to make effective life choices. Each child with untreated behavioural problems costs an average of £70,000 by the time they reach 28. 10 times the cost of children without behavioural problems. 1 in 6 children in the UK have special needs. Therapeutic interventions and resources, including money, are most effective in the early years and save society much more in later years. And did you know that 70% of people in prison have learning disabilities? Over the last 60 years, we've experienced a considerable increase in incomes, and yet we still find that too many children are starting school unable to make the most of their school lives. The exclusive concern about financial poverty affects children's life chances has prevented a more comprehensive understanding of why children's life chances are already determined for the most poor children before they even begin their first day at school. Let's take a new look at poverty. Children need nurturing. Children need adequate safety, stability, love, language, songs, routine, sleep, and nutrition. They need richly prepared environments which engage and nurture their interests and intellect. They need adults who are competent, confident, and curious to prepare these environments to help the child. Help me do it by myself. A recent revision in the UK Early Years Foundation stage focuses attention on developing children's learning in 3 prime areas, especially for children under 2 and children with special needs. And this is music to Montessori teachers' ears. These areas are personal and social development, communication and language, and physical development. During the first half of the 20th century, the predominant thought was that children's intelligence was fixed at birth. Research now shows that intensive early intervention with children raised in poor or incompetent environments can positively impact on children's potential for engagement and motivation in learning. Children from poor backgrounds can make good intellectual progress in nurturing environments. Life chances are fixed more or less by their family's social conditions rather than the child's IQ. And we have to remember that tests can only evaluate what the child has had the opportunity to experience thus far. So how can we create this professional competence? A child learns all he knows by discovering his world because age alone does not provide school readiness. Dr. Montessori urged us to be scientific pedagogues, and an important part of what we do in our work and practice is critiquing what we do and why. We're going to have some buzzwords now so we can take the last 100 years and bring it right up to date. Because when we're talking about the psychical development of our children, this isn't music to our parents' ears. We want to talk about maybe the cognitive development, the intellectual development. So we have to be able to speak in words that parents understand. Montessori broke the lockstep in the education of young children. Her schools made no effort to keep all the children doing the same thing at the same time. Rather, each child was free to examine and work with whatever happened to interest him. And this meant he was free to persist in a given concern as long as he cared to, and also free to change from one concern to another whenever a change appeared appropriate to him. You know, there's a bibliography at the back of this, so you don't need to be taking too many pictures. It's great that you're doing it. But all of the slides are up online, and there's a full bibliography, so you can base your research on that. Motivation is intrinsic. Contrary to earlier Freudian theory, Montessori observed that real motivation is intrinsic, not extrinsic, and anyone can see for themselves that nothing and no one coerces a child to engage and persist in a prepared environment. Daniel Pink, in his latest bestseller Drive, suggests that enjoyment-based intrinsic motivation, namely how creative a person feels when working on a project, is the strongest and most pervasive driver. And E. Mortimer Standing in Montessori, Her Life and Work, has children have an apparently irresistible urge. They pass through specific periods of intense and extraordinary interest in certain aspects of their environment to the exclusion of others. Vygotsky talks about flow as the zone of proximal development. Piaget says one of the sensory motor stages of an infant was characterized by the pleasure of being in the cause. Mumford has the optimal performance of an ability. And our hero at MIFA, Buckminster Fuller, the more a child experiences, the more he needs to experience. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, we were lucky enough to welcome him to Montessori Europe in Rome last October. He says, left to their own devices, children seek out flow with the inevitability of a natural law. Montessori described the universal laws of child development, the young child's absorbent mind, sensitive periods for finding the perfect match between inquiry and understanding, which brings us to our next buzzword, match. We need to observe and evaluate children's moments of pure concentration. The experiences must provide the match between what the child already knows and can do and be relevant to what is already accrued. If the circumstances are too simple and too familiar, the child will fail to develop and will likely to withdraw in boredom. If the circumstances presented demand too much of a child, he will withdraw or explode in anger, which is most interesting, as this is the classic response of the terrible twos who are unable to communicate their needs and feelings, and also the response of older children with special needs. But Vicar Hunt says, the best indicators of appropriate match are evidences of interest and mild surprise. And Dr. Montessori says, in the formation of man, the activities must be just a notch or two above his current capabilities. She says, our pedagogical methods are chosen to represent an incremental series of psychical stimuli, cognitive stimuli, intellectual stimuli, perfectly suited to the needs of each child. The environment stimulates each pupil to the level of psychical development that's individually suited to him and keeping with what he subjectively feels to be possible. The children have complete freedom of expression and are treated with great affection in an environment which is calm and warmed by a feeling of affection and peace. Children's general nutrition is improved so much. And I always think this is amazing. I haven't got the quote in front of me, but you'll know it. The children in the Casa, the early Casa, who attended, and the parents brought the other children and siblings along. The children who'd been to the Casa, where their whole general nutrition, she said they were ruddy, they were grown like the children of farmers' children, whereas the other children, the urban children, you know the quote. So the actual intellectual learning contributes to the whole general nutrition of the child. Now, this is Robin Jackson with another hat on. One of the things I do in the UK is UK and College Inspector, and also I inspect organisations with special needs, and these Campbell organisations included. And Robin says, inclusion and mainstreaming are among the biggest unresolved issues facing Campbell communities in Britain today. It's seen as an illustration of mainstream schools to be open and accepting to all children. In reality, children with complex needs, particularly those with behavioural and social problems, are routinely failing at school and arriving at Campbell after a succession of such failures. Here we have the universal laws of child development. The last line, the child should be given the freedom to develop within the laws of natural development. This is from What You Should Know About Your Child by Dr. Montessori. And this is my favourite ever quote from Montessori. It's in The Absorbent Mind. Last Thursday I had the privilege of sitting in the garden with Nikki and David in Auckland, and a monarch butterfly came by. Each period of child development is basically different from the others. Nevertheless, each lays the foundation for the one following it. To develop normally in the second period, a person must have developed well in the first. In the same way, the caterpillar and the butterfly are two creatures very different to look at and in the way they behave, yet the beauty of the butterfly comes from its life in the larval form and not through any efforts it may make to imitate another butterfly. Observing children's personality construction from birth. Similarly rooted in the unborn child's conscious mind are natural laws which determine psychological development, and they're common to all children. Differences in psychological development depend largely on the vicissitudes of life, on the accidents, setbacks and regressions produced in the mental field by those obstacles the child has to encounter in his path. The years from 0 to 6 are the most important for physical and cognitive development, and the same applies for personality development also. The infant in arms cannot be influenced by example or external pressure, but during the first 2 or 3 years a child may undergo influences that will alter his whole life future if he's been injured or suffered violence or met with severe obstacles during this period. Deviations of personality may ensue, and it follows that the child's character develops in accordance with the obstacles he's encountered or the freedom and favouring his development that he's enjoyed. There are no specific personality characteristics among special needs children that are not found in normal children. The personality reactions are exaggerated because of the situations in which they've been placed. Furthermore, special needs children often face fear, frustration, and they're allowed, or worse, expected to fail, even in their eyes of their parents. This failure to achieve what is expected of them produces a discrepancy between their capacity to behave and their capability to conform to the requirements of the environment. To adjust to failures and frustration, the children become aggressive, withdrawn, or regress to more immature levels of behaviour. Capability is not capacity. Compliance is not engagement. The behaviours of characteristics which these children show are not part of their handicap, but a result of the situation in which they've been placed. We noted that feelings of security, belonging, and accomplishment were thwarted. And Dr. Montessori observed that as to prognosis, or the hopes of correcting personality defects acquired in the postnatal period 0 to 3, they can be ameliorated in practice during the period 3 to 6, when nature is still busy perfecting many of the child's newly formed powers. But if the defects between 0 to 6 cannot be corrected, not only do they remain, but they get worse. Early intervention is vital if emerging personality defects are to be ameliorated before they become permanent. The work that we do as Montessori pedagogues must take its rightful historical place in championing the cause of children with special needs. Socially and ethically, we have no choice. Montessori in special education is not treated as an isolated phenomenon, rather it's presented against a comprehensive background of Montessori and regular education. Special education is but one dimension of regular education, for special children are, after all, on the same continuum with normal children. All children deserve to be loved, nurtured, and treated with respect. All Montessori pedagogues should be competent, confident, and curious as to how they observe and guide the needs of every child. All Montessori pedagogues should act socially and scientifically as they seek to find the match between what the child knows and can do and what will drive his next steps in learning. Sometimes in our busyness, we forget that Dr. Montessori was a pioneer of the social pedagogy impulse. She wanted to see the creation of a more open and tolerant society. She recognized, as did Jan Comenius, Pestalozzi, Froebel, Koenig, Robert Owen, and others, that this could only be achieved by a process of social renewal. Are we competent, confident, and curious? Do we recognize motivation, match, and flow? Do we recognize the changing needs of modern children? As more and more children are being diagnosed with special educational needs, Montessori education is more relevant now than ever. Montessori focused her life's work on the universal laws of child development, how and why children learn, what gets in the way of their learning, and how to ameliorate defects. Special needs children can profit richly from Montessori's legacy, but only if we have faith in the child and truly follow him. The full text of the Have Faith in the Child is there for you. The bibliography is there for you. Thank you.